This is episode 558 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, unfortunately, the biggest news this week is a loss, not just for Rio Grande Foundation, but for personal freedom throughout New Mexico. After 4 days of testimony here in Albuquerque at the New Mexico Bar Association's offices, after testimony from myself, after testimony from my colleague Marina Herrera, after more than 3,500 individual letters sent to the Environmental Improvement Board. Let's see, after some really compelling, I think, testimony and kind of that quasi-legal mode, Pete Domenici Jr. representing the Car Dealers Association. After we delivered boxes full of our comments to the EIB, the board voted on a 3-2 basis to adopt the clean car standards put forth by Governor Lujan Grisham. 3-2 on a 7-member board. They couldn't even get
can't even do math very well.
Can't even get a majority of an unelected appointed board by the governor. But, you know, this is obviously being trumpeted as a major victory for the governor and the environmental groups, etc. Before I kick it over to you, I will say that, a lot of people ask about what's next. Where's this whole conversation going? I don't know from a legal or policy direction, because we're not the lead dog, if you will, in the legal resources department. That's going to have to come from the Car Dealers Association and some of the other advocates with bigger checkbooks, and also, quite frankly, a more substantial, potential loss at the hands of the EIB and Governor Lujan Grisham. We did our education and advocacy, and I'll say it's one of the things that I think the Rio Grande Foundation's done best in my 17 years. For those watching on Facebook right now, we have an opinion piece in today's Albuquerque Journal. We had one prior to the vote. We did a lot of work on this issue, trying to bring sanity back. But, when the system is rigged against you in a unelected board, it's obviously hard to get people who are paid advocates for those industries, for the environmental groups, to pull back and not do something that will harm New Mexicans. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. There's definitely a lot more to unpack here, but take it away, Wally.
Yes, well, if I were to prognosticate with regard to what's likely to happen on this, I'll use another kind of, these things are fall under what I call aspirational rulemaking. It's like we hope and we pray and we think and we believe that these things are going to happen, but we don't have any really plan to get there, nor is the market there or the technology or whatever. Calls to mind California had these, and still has these overly ambitious renewable energy standards that you're supposed to meet in California. But lo and behold, if they stuck to those, all the lights were going to go off, and it was going to be bedlam in California. So the Californians just said, "Oh, we're going to say that natural gas counts." So what will happen in this is I do believe, and I'll go through a few brief reasons why I think, but I think that something will give way before this thing gets fully implemented, just based on the standard, just based on the status of how this industry is developing and what's going on. But one of the things could be, well, maybe it doesn't need to be fully electric. Maybe we can accept hybrids, which have always been a pretty good option given all the problems that face with plug-ins. So we'll see what happens in the future. But the next governor will be dealing with this completely because it'll start to really phase in, and the real futility and damage and inappropriateness of this rule will come into play. So, just a real couple quick things. What's wrong with this regulation? One is supply and demand. People aren't demanding these cars, and it doesn't matter what we do here in New Mexico. By the way, it's this is a national and international problem that people are not wanting to buy electric cars, and if they don't want to buy them, and the car dealers are losing their shirts over them, they are not going to be supplying them. Charging's a huge issue. It's expensive if you have a home, a garage that you can put it in, but if you can do that and the electric feeder in your area can handle it, it's expensive, but it can be pretty convenient to do. But remote charging is still a disaster. You know, there's another article that came out in the last couple of days of the Wall Street Journal that Los Angeles has the most public charging stations, and then in parentheses, that don't work because there's just all kinds of problems with those. We are in a high inflation, high interest rate environment, and capital is not cheap and easy to come by, whether it's to get batteries out there, beef up the electric generation and distribution system. All of those are problems. And then, you know, lithium, more and more people are starting to say lithium is a nice transition. You know, remember when they used to say that natural gas was the bridge fuel? Well, maybe lithium batteries are the bridge technology for electric vehicles, but unless and until there's something better than those, or there's just huge improvements in lithium battery technology, we're going to have a lot of problems. And why is that? It's because of how much lithium there is in the world, how much you have to mine, how many tons you have to mine to get these batteries for each car, the time for break even on carbon dioxide. And then I think this is all boiling down to this EV rule in New Mexico is there's this belief that there's this perfect technology out there, and boy, electric vehicles are it. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. But if you believe electric vehicles are perfect, you don't even want to talk about imperfect solutions like hybrid or, you know, hydrogen in the future or anything else. So yeah, we've got some issues to deal with in New Mexico, and interestingly, and I guess in some ways. The car dealers are going to be taking the brunt of it because during the transition, people can certainly go to surrounding states and get their gas and diesel powered vehicles if they're not going to be available in New Mexico.
Yeah, that's all well said and very well put. So, you know, the plan, such as it is for by the summer of 2026, 43% of
The summer of love, Paul, the summer
new
of love.
exactly new vehicles sold in New Mexico to be electric vehicles. Now, currently, we're talking about 3% or so of vehicles sold in New Mexico being electric. They are piling up on dealership lots. I fully expect that Governor Lujan Grisham and the legislature will use some amount of the oil and gas largesse, the surplus, $3.5 billion available to the state to push some more subsidies or, you know, subsidies for the EVs themselves, charging stations, et cetera, et cetera. But it does take time to deploy all that. It takes resources above and beyond money that will wind up being very expensive to the point of possibly prohibitive in the time between now and summer of 2026. Again, a period of less than 3 years here, what we're working with. So,
Well, and Paul, just consider it things like education or crime or homelessness or access to health care. Just look back at how much progress New Mexico makes looking back 3 years on anything, and just s- look forward and see what you think is going to happen. And you said, well said by you as well, there's lots of issues that, and this is not money, it's supply chain, it's technology. And you know what, in places where they've had to put in a lot of chargers very quickly, guess what, the electric system couldn't handle it, and so what do? They put diesel generators, so your electric car not only isn't gasoline, it's diesel powered in places, across the Western U.S.
Yeah. So, as I wrote in the paper today, this plan will never come to fruition in anything resembling the way the politicians and the environmental groups kind of claim it will. There will have to be changes to adapt to reality. What that exactly looks like, I don't know, but yeah, it could be something along the lines of uh, natural gas is suddenly a renewable and green fuel. I don't know what it'll look like, but uh, people will go out of state. They will um, not purchase new vehicles, which is always an option. There will be distortions in the market. Car dealers will go out of business. And depending on the political winds in this state and in this nation, there could be changes in, well, there will be changes in leadership. The question is, will those changes result in a an overturning of all or part of this rule? I don't know the answers to these questions. There, I suspect there will be some legal questions. I certainly think from a optics standpoint, any objective median, we don't have that, we know that, but an objective media would be looking carefully at the idea of an unelected board that can't even get a majority of its members to endorse the policies of the person who put them there. Again, a 3-2 vote on a 7-member board. Clearly, there's heartburn about this issue. As a quick aside, the Albuquerque board adopted it unanimously, which only highlights the fact that that board needs much further reform and needs to be completely changed in its approach. Will the legislature do anything? Several Democrats did speak out in opposition to this, most notably Senator George Munoz, Democrat from Gallup, who has taken upon himself seemingly the loyal opposition role to Governor Lujan Grisham on a number of topics. So kudos to George, uh, but it don't think that you can get this Democratic body to pull back and say, no, Governor, we don't support this, at least until the stuff hits the fan, so to speak.
No, I think you're right. So, yeah, as you were saying that, not now. The chances of this being dealt with legislatively by either in this session or next are pretty slim. After that, everything is going to be fair game as the impact of this starts to become much more apparent.
A couple of brief news items relating to EVs. We found there was a story from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the Texas sister organization, which found that EVs cost $53,000 more over 10 years than conventional vehicles. A lot of this is because the operations of EVs are heavily subsidized, from not paying gas tax to subsidized charging stations to tax credits and other things that uh, make those vehicles look better than they are in the marketplace. And just as a quick aside, I sat through a lot of the testimony, specifically Monday and Wednesday, uh, and many of the proponents of the EV policy that's been adopted said things, they were Albuquerque and Santa Fe, white, Anglo, clearly upper income, wealthy people who talked about the this works for me perspective. because they have a single family home that they can charge their vehicle at their house. They're not living in an apartment. They're not dealing with street parking. They don't drive long distances on a regular basis. So a bunch of things that make it work for them.
And likely have at least one, two, or three other vehicles at their
Yeah.
disposal.
So many different factors that make it work for them. And then there was testimony about folks, on Navajo tribal lands where the electricity is an issue. Driving long distance in rural New Mexico is much more of a common issue. So numerous different factors. So some really compelling testimony, and we're going to do our best to post some of this. Certainly the RGF testimony up at Heirs of Enchantment. So keep an eye on that space for additional information. And then literally today's Wall Street Journal, November 21st, 2023, Wall Street Journal scours Los Angeles and finds 30% of all EV chargers are broken. This is very similar to the story we dealt with a year or so ago from San Francisco, which found a similar ratio. And these are, of course, ground zero in the United States for electric vehicles. LA, San Francisco, these are places where EVs are as popular as they are anywhere in the country. And yet the technology, you see it all the time with gas pumps, but you have 30 or 40 gas pumps, and chances are you can find another gas pump that's not broken. EV charging stations, because the duration and the lack of availability of them, it's often make or break for that one charging station. So it's a real issue if you have this level of problems with the technology.
Yeah, there is no doubt about that, Paul. And in that article, there's a whole host of issues. Just being broken is one, out of order. And I will say that since the COVID era, my observation in greater Bernalillo County is there's a lot more gas pumps that are out of order than ever were before. So I don't know if it costs more than it did, if the staffing issues are what's getting it. But I've yet to be hindered from buying fuel in a reasonable
Right.
because of that, as you point out. But these charging stations in Los Angeles also had payment issues. And then the one that's really big from my perspective is they had handshake issues, which is you plug it in and the charger has a computer and the car has a computer. And if they can't decide to work with each other, charging is not going to happen. So, yeah, even in Los Angeles, where they're way, quote, ahead of New Mexico, there's some not ready for prime time issues going on out there. And then just to reiterate one more time, it's like, yes, if you have the money in the home and the inclination to add an electric vehicle, great, that's good. But boy, they are not the sole or primary vehicle for very many people, even in greater Los Angeles.
Yeah. So it's, ultimately, this policy will not be implemented as it kind of is purported to be designed. Fundamentally, even if the automakers decide to really focus on electric vehicles in a way that is not being done, they're pulling back from EVs. We are in lockstep with California because of the way this rule is written. This whole process is being done. California is going to suck up most of the EVs. If there winds up being a competitive market for EVs where, because of demand, either market demand or coerced demand, more likely coerced demand, we are just not going to be able to get the supply of electric vehicles to accomplish this particular goal, because California is going to pull in more of those electric vehicles. Now, I firmly believe that this will not be the case, that we will not, that people will just go, whether it's California, New Mexico, or other states, that they will find an alternative, and that ultimately it is the car dealerships, it is their jobs and their, input in terms of taxes, the charities that they support, all of those factors will be the final determining factor, which makes this impossible to ultimately really take fully effect. But Michelle Lujan Grisham will be on the way out the door by that time. This will be a problem for her successor and the legislature that exists in that time, whatever it may be. And as with anything, as with COVID specifically, I was flabbergasted, floored, stunned, shocked, amazed, perplexed, all the surprises rolled into one, that more people in New Mexico did not respond in a hell no, throw the bums out sort of way when Michelle Lujan Grisham governed the way she did in a power hungry, condescending, and entirely inappropriate in a democratic republic way throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, by the way, and I'll get you something in a second, but I'll leave my thought there. I have been appalled and frustrated by the electorate of New Mexico before. I sincerely hope that I am not again, but you never know. The abortion issue in specific has carried Democrat politicians, hard left progressive politicians, to re-election more times than I care to count throughout the United States. And the sad fact is that seem to be a larger than I would expect element of the population here in New Mexico and across the country that doesn't care how many of our freedoms are taken away from us. As long as they have abortion, they'll vote for them.
Yes, and then Paul, as you were talking about that, my mind went to the James Carville quote when Bill Clinton was running for president: "Is it's the economy, stupid." And abortion, really, and for big swaths of the electorate, that is more important than the economy. However, where the economy's going, that and quite frankly, on a state by state basis, abortion is being worked out. So once it in a place like New Mexico, it's enshrined. What else is there to do? And so, will economic issues come back? And then, a big one is I do think the right to transportation and what that costs is it's the economy stupid, but it could be it's the car stupid at some point if people really can't can't get where they need to go in a reasonable time period at a reasonable cost in a way that makes sense for them. They could consider voting against those who are advocates of that policy. But we are not there yet. I have a feeling we're on a 2, 3, 4 year timeline before some of that, where really it hits the road. Because right now it's just been passed. What changed the day after it passed? Nothing. What will change in a month? Probably nothing. But as time goes on, the changes will be made readily apparent in this very dynamic, weird electric vehicle implementation market. And then one final point is we have these batteries that are a big shortage, a big shortcoming of the electric vehicles. But as I've said before, those are in competition for another government override, which is the Energy Transition Act. Those batteries are needed and required to move forward, getting away from fossil fuels on the electric generation side. And so there could be some competitive issues for those. And then you throw into that China and all the places they're made and all of that. And so there's not a clear path for how we get there. It's going to be a bumpy road.
Yeah, and kind of in the world of education / pandemic overreach, the New York Times editorial board this week acknowledge in their editorial the startling evidence on learning loss is in. Whew, that's some timely news there, Wally. Thank you, New York
You know
Times.
what, Paul? They must have already run the North Winds Civil War article, and so they had to do something to, report. They must have had some space to fill up. Yeah, that's a big surprise there. So,
Yeah, so kudos to the New York Times for finally admitting that they were wrong. And of course, by extension, Michelle Lujan Grisham was wrong. And nowhere has learning loss been more devastating than New Mexico, which already struggled mightily with education outcomes. I cannot read the article because it's behind a paywall, and I morally refuse to subscribe or give the New York Times a nickel of my money. So folks can have at it with that. But you can read the headlines and you can read articles about the New York Times statements. So I encourage you to check those out because, again, the propaganda wing of the establishment Democratic Party is not worth giving my nickel to. Now, speaking of education, man, another LFC report is out that I really, I could have written this myself. We could have written this ourselves. We don't have the resources of the taxpayer financed LFC, which probably of the entire New Mexico government and the governing apparatus is the best spent money we have here. The LFC report focuses on education and says, have a seat, Wally. Make sure you're seated for this. More education spending is not leading to significant boosts for New Mexico students. I know this is very stunning, but yeah, hard to believe that, again, the LFC, they're a little more timely. I'll give them credit than the New York Times. But yeah, we know New Mexico has poured money from the oil and gas industry into education in recent years. And the LFC is reporting that, and direct quotes that they are saying, let's see, while money going into education has increased, student enrollment has decreased about 1% each year for the past few years. Now, that's enrollments, but then they say, given the demographics and projections that we're hearing, we don't see their results recovering in the near future. So the LFC is not only saying that results have deteriorated, but because people have either left the state due to the COVID restrictions, or they are pulling their kids out of public schools, that they don't see outcomes improving in the foreseeable future. And that would be my analysis as well. Senator George Munoz, again, the voice of sanity on the Democratic side, said roughly $6 billion is what we're pumping into our public education system, and we've got zero to show for it. Ouch.
yeah, no kidding. And so, Paul, the story for years has been from the teachers union is that you're not paying the teachers enough, and that's why educational outcomes aren't good. If you would just pay them more, things would get better. Well, there has been, now uh, not only the Rio Grande Foundation, but the LFC, the Legislative Finance Committee staffers have figured out the same thing, and we'll see what happens. More and more, I'm seeing at least people who are not afraid to call out the teachers union and say, yeah, educational achievement is an important thing, and if you don't deal with it, there maybe it may get to the point just like electric vehicles where changes are made politically that are not to the status quo, the teachers unions satisfaction.
Yeah. So again, with this legislature and the voters of New Mexico, unless they decide to take a very different and dramatic approach, doesn't have to be school choice. That is certainly our preference, but just doing what Mississippi did, following through many ways with the reforms of the Martinez administration, where she tried to really focus on early childhood reading, teaching teachers how to teach, holding students back if they cannot read, intervening if they cannot read, all of those things that Martinez tried. You have to consider the Overton window of political opportunity, and that Martinez's reforms would at least be within that relative window. I would say that education savings accounts, broad-based school choice, money following the students, really not within that so-called Overton window of political opportunity. Now, when you talk about uh, Texas, well, they're a much different state with a much different political culture and much more uh, strong mentality of let's make government work and serve the people it's supposed to serve, not the special interest groups. Well, Texas has tried now for 3 straight years to embrace school choice, money following the students. And unfortunately, in Lone Star State, while we often praise Texas for their public policy achievements, education is one where they continue to kind of go with the same old, same old. Now, they have a much overall better education system, much better performance. They're nowhere near the very, very bottom. They're kind of in that mushy middle. But uh, Texas, you know, partially, I think it's just they want to be seen as being a leader on the conservative side when it comes to these policies, and the rural Republicans and the Democrats that exist in Texas in the legislature have pushed back for different reasons, but united together, stopping again educational choice in the state of Texas. So disappointing as a neighboring state. We always want to see our neighbors do well, even if we are kind of stuck at the bottom. But yeah, Texas has some challenges that they are facing when it comes to actually reforming their education system there.
Yeah, and then New Mexico and Texas could probably not be more different when it comes to how education is funded. Texas no income tax, property taxes are a very big part of their tax structure, and there's a lot of local property taxes are the predominant source of funding, and therefore I think some more responsibility for local people taking saying, "Hey, this is the money we're raising locally. We need to make it work for our schools." But it doesn't mean that all is paradise in Texas, where as opposed to New Mexico, where there are property taxes dedicated to schools, but those are all swept up into Santa Fe and commingle with other money before it comes back to the state. So technically, your property taxes will fund education in your community, but how I've seen them doing the calculation is it just is we're gonna do the funding formula. Oh yeah, and you get what your property taxes are, but if you have higher property taxes, you get less of other funds. So it's everything goes through Santa Fe, which is the looking to others to solve our problem, and maybe less of a local approach to figuring out what to do on education.
Yeah, and Texas's approach, that local property tax driven approach to education, really is a stumbling block. It's one of many stumbling blocks to a choice driven policy situation. New Mexico, with its statewide funding formula, which I believe is a fundamentally flawed formula for a variety of reasons we can't get into right here, uh, actually lends itself to the choice reform, but that for a variety of obvious political reasons, most notably the uh, Democratic Party being a wholly owned subsidiary of the NEA and the AFT, those are reasons why New Mexico hasn't gone down that path. I would also put in an honorable mention or dishonorable mention for high school football as a reason Texas does not go down the choice path. If you want to just an incredibly good read about Texas high school football, you got to read the book, not the show, Friday Night Lights, made into a movie, which was also excellent. But anybody who knows anything about Texas knows that high school football is a huge deal in that state, and yet another reason they don't want those kids to get out of those traditional public schools where they might be on the football team.
No, I think you're right. And Paul, just to add another example of that impact of Texas football is there's the freshman red shirt, where if you're young enough before you go into your freshman year that you would graduate and still be able to play when you're a senior, they go ahead and keep you in eighth grade for a couple years or ninth grade for a couple years so that you'll be able to, just like in college football, be there for five. Be there for 5 years, play for four. So yeah, football, boy, the only thing that comes close to it in New Mexico, I would say, is women's basketball on the reservation. But that is relatively localized to that northwest part of New Mexico. But high school football is it's big in north, south, east, and west, in our fair neighbor to the east.
Yeah. Let's see. So the United got their stadium. City Council on a 7-2 vote approved the lease. I have, as we always do about anything that government does in the state of New Mexico, I have serious concerns that due to inflation and the rising costs of construction, that getting a stadium built for the price, for the amount of money that they claim is going to be a real problem, and that just not going to work out very well for the taxpayers. Only time will tell, and then we'll be able to tell you, I told you so yet again, which is always a frustrating thing, but it's kind of the way of the world here in New Mexico politics. Uh, you know, Obviously issues regarding the utility of space at the Balloon Fiesta Park, and there are concerns with that whole industry. I have said, and I will say it again, use a fraction of the resources to refurbish UNM Stadium to make it a little bit better for soccer. Uh, Use natural grass, which we all know is superior to turf for football, and it's required basically for soccer. The Lobos play football games at the stadium, less than 10 times a year, comfortably less than 10 times a year. Then you got the New Mexico Bowl and church services on Easter morning, and I don't know what the heck they use at the facility for the rest of the year. So let's should have considered that. You also have all the parking available, no issues with any other tenants, by and large. Strikes me as common sense. But in a world of unconstrained resources financially, UNM has zero incentive to do anything with anybody else to play nice, and the United have no incentive to try to do something like that. But we'll build them a fancy new stadium because poor New Mexico does one thing well. We like to spend money. And real quick, in a sign of, I guess we'll go with optimism on this one, even though it's foreign optimism. Javier Milei, a ardent supporter of free markets, got elected president in Argentina. I, way back once upon a time in 2001, lived in Argentina for 4 months, did a fellowship with a free market think tank in the city of Rosario, and just had a really interesting insight into Argentina, its economy, and its challenges. Argentina in 1900 was one of the wealthiest countries, top 10 wealthiest countries in the world. It has essentially fallen on hard times over the decades, following Peronist, which is a combination of socialism and fascism. Really, the not trifecta, I guess, the duopoly of really bad public policies. They went into an economic crisis shortly after I left Argentina at the end of 2001. They've bounced around through crisis after crisis. It is one of the most beautiful and just wonderful places I've ever been on the planet. A lot of different traveling I did around there. But because of poor politics and poor economics, they have continued to struggle as a nation. So Mr. Milei has a lot of work to do. I wish him the best of luck. But Argentina is a nation that desperately needs to change course to get out of its kind of economic doldrums. They've seen out of control inflation in recent years, and that has really helped kind of seed the nation for a reformer, kind of a outside the box person like Milei to be elected, and we'll see if he can do some reforms. The stock market and some of their other national indicators have risen in recent days since the election over the weekend. We can only hope that he has a Congress down there in Argentina that is willing to engage. We've seen the same routine here in New Mexico. There are many, many similarities economically. The biggest difference is, of course, that thank God New Mexico does not print its own currency, because you can bet that would be a disaster of epic proportions. But a lot of similarities between New Mexico and Argentina.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to succeed, but failure, I don't know, tends to take some pretty consistent paths. And one of the indications of that is high inflation. And once you get it, it's tough to get rid of. And if there's anyone in Washington, D.C. listening, we have some pretty high inflation right now here in the United States of America. And I don't think we want to be in the position of some of our South American countries that we share the hemisphere with.
Yeah. So, with that little bit of optimism, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Have a great Thanksgiving. And be thankful for the freedoms we do have in this country and in this state, and all the blessings that we have. So find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.